everybody. It always feels like nobody's watching for these first few minutes, and they aren't. But when people watch this later, they are. So it's kind of like you should start right away, right? Hi everyone, my name is Zach Haller. Welcome to Trending Topics. I'm going to give it a few minutes to get a few viewers to join us. So when you sign in, tell me your name, tell me where you're from, and what you're drinking, because here on Trending Topics we drink. And we not just drink, the phrase is you, if you don't like to drink, or if you don't want to drink, then you, hi Shane, welcome. So if you want to drink, this is what you do, you drink. If you don't want to drink, it's fine, you just choose your vice. Whatever vice makes you feel nice, that's how it goes. And if you're drinking, then when I drink, you drink. So that's our one rule here on Trending Topics. Okay, we'll practice. Ooh! Ooh, okay, wow, alright. So that is a stiff drink, y'all. Do you ever just see you have a little bit of alcohol left in the bottom? You're like, oh, there's just one drink's left. Then you pour it in, and all of a sudden it's 3/4 of the way up your glass. And you're like, well, that's a lot of whiskey. Guess I gotta do something with it. So this is mostly whiskey. But that's good, that's fine, that's right? And you can drink whatever you want, alcohol or water is life. But get something fun, because it's more fun for you when I'm a little loosened up. It's more fun for me when you're a little loosened up. Everybody's a little bit more fun with the comment fingers. Drink in moderation and enjoy your vices responsibly, but let's be real, it's nice to get a little loosey-goosey, alright? So, my name is Zach Haller. Welcome to Real Progressive's Trending Topics, the show where we talk about what's trending, what's not, and what certainly should be. I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington, so let me know where you're from. I am in the Pacific time zone, so I always like to find out where everybody is from. So, let me know if I'm not loud enough for anything. Packing a bowl absolutely counts. That's a really highly recommended activity that feel free, especially, feel free to. Sometimes I'm about to say something and I'm like, I shouldn't say that. And I'm really proud of myself, because sometimes I think inappropriate things and shouldn't say them, and I'm really proud when I don't say them. But we're going to talk about a few people today. Well, we're not going to talk just about people. We're going to talk about things going on that seem to be revolving around some of the same kind of cast of characters. So we'll get started. So most of you may know that my kind of thing lately is the Democratic fraud lawsuit. So the DNC fraud lawsuit is kind of becoming my subject matter. Some consider me an expert on it. Great, super. So interestingly enough, part of what is kind of making me unique in reporting on the lawsuit is that I actually am one of the few journalist people out there that actually gives a shit the Democratic Party is completely fraudulent. And as a reminder, I've obviously been screaming this at the top of my lungs from the top of a mountain, but the Democratic Party rigged the primary to favor Hillary Clinton, obscure Bernie Sanders, and elevate Donald Trump before any Americans voted. And then all these Americans voted, and it didn't matter that they voted. The Democratic Party decided that they were favoring Hillary Clinton and that she would be the nominee. And that happened. Now, obviously they were accepting donations from voters for that entire period of time, and they were advertising a neutral primary. Now, that didn't happen. So asking for your money, asking for you to pay for a raffle ticket when they know that they're not going to put your name in the bin, they're just going to take your money for the raffle ticket, that's called fraud. And the Democrats have a very tricky argument in court. They not only argued that they have the right, so they basically argued that they have the right to rig the primary. They argued that they have no legal obligation to honoring votes, particularly when they're taking donations, and that they could have rigged the primary if they wanted to. They argued that they didn't, but they argued that they could rig the primary, and I think pretty much everyone knows that they did. And so at this point, we really only have one reality, is that the Democratic Party it is totally open with the concept that they are fine to rig their primaries. This is coming from the national organization, but when you understand how the DNC plays a role on every smaller race in the country, you realize that this is actually kind of their complete co-op over every single Democratic Party voter, being like, we want you to participate, just your bodies to be here, but we get to actually pick who you're voting for. And that's messed up. And it's fraud to begin with. And not only is it fraudulent, the other really serious aspect of it that people really kind of downplay is that, oh, nice. Yeah. I use journalists in quotes because I know some people are a little sensitive to me using that term. That's fine. I just write about what I see as the truth. And when the Clintons have consolidated the entire media and turned the truth into nothing, then anyone who's just talking about the truth is whistleblowing. So basically, the Democratic Party has openly said in court that they see no legal obligation to voters, that they're willing and able to rig the primary if they want to on their own. So at that point, it's really difficult to even understand how you could ever ask a person to vote Democrat again. It's like, hey, vote for us. We're not going to listen to you, but give us your vote. Don't vote for anyone else. Give it to us, and we're going to throw it away. It's ridiculous, right? So the other aspect of this that you really have to remember is that the Democrats were just in office for 8 years, and people really get tunnel vision about this. They forget. They just are so adhered to this Republicans are bad mentality in their head that they don't remember that a Democratic president named Barack Obama, who was a Democrat, was president for the last 8 years, right? This is obvious. It's so stupid that I have to even say this, but so many people don't understand that a Democratic president, one-party president, became president, was president for 8 years, just so happened to spend those entire 8 years at war. And not only were those 8 years enough that at war, that president allowed his party, his sitting party, to rig the primary, to block the voters, and to allow the person he designated to take the primary nomination and ideally win the presidency. So that party of war, that party of 8 years of war that was worse than George W. Bush. You can't say the Republicans are worse. Obama made things much, 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 much worse than George W. Bush. So this is the party of war for 8 years, and they tried to fix the primary to allow a party of war to continue to be in office. And now, obviously, the Republicans are on the same corporate team, yes, but the Republicans, A, weren't in office the last 8 years. They weren't, right? That Barack Obama was not he acted like a Republican, but he was not a member of the Republican Party, nor were his administration members of the Republican Party for the last 8 years. And the Republican Party did not rig their primary, right? I mean, it's obviously, we have a long way to go in terms of making sure elections are fair, but the Republican Party didn't, this is Drugs Rambling, nice. The Republican Party didn't rig their primary. They didn't. Not only did they not rig their primary while accepting donations, saying it was lawful, that it was neutral, but they also didn't get busted, and they also didn't get a lawsuit filed against them in which they appeared before the court to say that the Republican Party has the right to rig the primary. Right? We know that the Republican Party probably to some extent has their own form of internal way that they're manipulating their votes. Right? That's the different situation here. The Democratic president was president for the last 8 years, and he allowed his party to rig their primary and disenfranchise over 13 million progressives to try and continue the Democratic Party's legacy. So we have to think about this very specifically as to Democrats. And yes, the Republicans are bad in their own ways. Obviously, they're both on the same team, but only one team has argued in federal court that they have the right to rig their primary. Until the other party is in federal court arguing that they have the right to rig their primary, they're not in the same position as the Democrats. And you can't say that they're both the same. Weird, okay? That's just an unfortunate reality. So, now that we've made it that far, you have to take a really close look at all of the Democrats who are still in the Democratic Party after the fraud lawsuit hearings happen, and it has been exposed that the Democratic Party, behind closed doors, has planned to propose to the federal judge that the lawsuit should get thrown out. They filed a motion to dismiss the fraud lawsuit. And they want it thrown out because they have the right to rig their primary behind closed doors. Every single Democrat in the party is either fine with that strategy or in on that strategy if they're still a Democrat, right? Like, I know it's really basically like unheard of thing for an elected official or anyone to switch their party affiliation. But at the same time, we've seen people like Tulsi take very dramatic steps to quit from the DNC or to swear off lobbying. You can do things to distance yourself from the DNC, and basically no one is. And Bernie is the biggest problem of all this. And he just recently, as you may know, Tim Canova announced that he is running again in 2018 to challenge Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida. Tim ran against Debbie in 2016, and Bernie supported Tim's race. Most people know this, right? Bernie supported Tim's race. He advocated for Tim. He helped with fundraising emails and things like that for Tim Canova. At the last minute, he kind of gave up, which I didn't blame him for because it was a heavy lifting race to win to begin with, and it really didn't, to me, make sense for Bernie to put a whole lot of energy into a race where a challenger was up against a really powerful incumbent. And to me, it would have made Bernie kind of look bad the more energy he put into the Tim Canova race in 2016 because of how likely it was for Debbie to win, being an incumbent and then being in red Florida. So, but the point is Bernie did advocate and campaign for Tim Canova. Now, Tim Canova announced that he ran again, and Bernie all of a sudden turned it legitimately into Mariah Carey, and he's like, I don't know who Tim Canova is. Who's that? He legitimately didn't even say, like, I remember supporting Tim a year ago, but this year I don't want to anymore. He is now pretending like he doesn't even know who Tim Canova is. And that's obviously messed up. And that's everyone's last big indicator that Bernie is no longer on the team of the people. And to whatever extent he was never on the team of the people, some people are getting really, cynical about it and going back to see as far as they can think that Bernie might have been conning us this whole time. I don't know exactly how far back he got, but I know, to me, he at least did enough to rally people and build a huge revolution that was worth it for him to do in and of itself. I could talk on another live stream about what I think that at what point that I think Bernie kind of got co-opted by the Democrats midway. I think that he started his race in earnest, and then basically, to me, it looked like he was allowed to run by the Clintons, and at some point engaged in an agreement with them, and that's to me all I really believe to be clear. And so to me, it does seem that Bernie did run on his own, per his own volition, and that if Hillary would have had it her way, Bernie would have never even ran, and there would have been literally no primary. So we can unpack that another time. But basically, the unfortunate reality is that Bernie is not sticking up for the people who voted for him in the primary last year, who had their votes disenfranchised, despite how much we know Bernie knows about election integrity. He's not standing up for the people whose votes were disenfranchised. He went with Clinton right after the DNC and just mum's the word. All of a sudden there was no fraud. And then that's carried on into, his lack of trustworthiness definitely contributed to people's not ability to vote for Hillary, right? And eventually he started even buying into all this Russia hysteria, which Caitlin Johnstone wrote an amazing article about all the different problematic elements of the Russiagate hysteria. And besides the fact that, it's basically just xenophobia, it's like the most obvious anti the other nonsense I've ever heard. It's basically inflaming war, right? So if I were to real quick touch on that and share the video, by the way, thanks to everybody who's already shared it. Share this. Let's get a bunch of people on there. And it's really funny to me because when the Young Turks do their videos, there's usually only 200 people watching, if that, not even that. 200 is generous. That was what the Democrats' live was. The Young Turks, Nomiki had a thing just recently. It was 90, 100 people were watching. I'm like, how many thousands of dollars go into your show and you can't even get 500 people to watch live, like that is really a bad sign to me. But I drink to that because that means that indie media is really what people want to be watching right now. So share this, and thanks for sharing if you already have. So I was going to talk about, let's see here, the Russia, Bernie. We basically completely lost Bernie, and Tim Canova is your last sign that Bernie is no longer fighting for the people. He is now completely and utterly a part of the Democratic Party, and his role seems exactly to be a recruiter for the Democratic Party, which we know is a party of war for the last 8 years and was a party that rigged their primary against their people. In addition to all of the other problems with the Democratic Party, they're a party of war, party of fraud, party of corruption, and now Bernie, months and months and months and months later, is now advocating still for the Democrats, trying to keep people in the Democratic Party without any acknowledgement that people may want to leave the party for good reason. It's really bizarre to see how aggressively they're trying to keep people in the Democratic Party, and this is actually getting stepped up. So Caitlin wrote a great article about all the nasty elements of the Russia hysteria, including how it's basically, that's what I was going to touch on, the purpose of the Russia lie. So many things to discuss. But Bernie, basically, my train of thought is going into three different places here. But basically, I mean, we saw through the People's Summit, Bernie's brand is kind of getting enveloped in the Democratic Party. He's totally fine with it. Bernie's pretty much a millionaire now. He wasn't this big celebrity before the race, right? He's not running for president anymore. He earned all of that money, all of that notoriety, all of that exposure, all of that branding that the Democratic Party is using now at the People's Summit and everything, and Bernie's just along for the ride. I do expect that to some extent, like, he is doing it, like, begrudgingly. I don't think that he wants to be doing this, but he's been doing it now for so long that it's just to the point where he could have done anything else. He could have quit this unity tour. He could have done any of these other things. He could have been more respectful to Tim Canova. He's just a dick now. It sucks. But the article that Caitlin wrote, in addition to the Russia article, she also wrote an article about the Jill Stein bashing that's happening. And some of you may have seen a lot of, basically an uptick in smear pieces against Jill Stein. And you also have probably seen an uptick in basically smears against independent journalists and third-party candidates. Basically, the Democrats right now are in just such a full-scale meltdown that not only are they doing everything to try and get people to stay in the Democratic Party, they're also ramping up their attacks on third-party independent people, including Jill Stein, and trying to attack Jill Stein to give independents and third-party people considering new options to basically try and tell them, no, you can't go to a Republican Party, you can't go to a third party, you're stuck with us. That's kind of what the Democrats are saying now, is you're stuck with us. And I'm used to, obviously, third-party voters getting demeaned and getting insulted. I voted for Jill Stein, as many of you know. And I experienced all of that. Like, oh, it's your fault, Zach. Like, you wasted your vote. It's like people say all these ridiculous things about the 1% of people, probably more, but 1% of people that voted for Jill Stein, when basically about 50% of Americans didn't vote. They're still claiming that this one minor sliver of people voting third party is the reason that their party is failing. It's the most ridiculous nonsense I've ever heard, and it just really blows my mind that not only do the Democrats lose continually, they beat up on third parties, they beat up on Republicans, and anyone who's even considering voting Republican. And again, I know Republicans are full of shit for the most part, but at the same time, they're not the party that was just at war for 8 years, and they're not the party that just argued in court that they can rig the primary. So unfortunately, you can't just say it's apples to apples and rule out the Republicans like you can rule out the Democrats at this point, because the Democrats have officially taken people's money and said, this is a fair primary, and it's not, and basically looted people and taken their money expecting their vote. The Republicans haven't done that yet, right? So the Democrats' strategy is to beat up on third parties, to beat up on Republicans, to beat up on anyone considering Republicans, all as a way to basically trap people. It's very analogous to abusive relationship, right? It's basically trying to trap people in the Democratic Party. And nobody should tolerate that. And it's amazing because if you just really think about it comfortably, yes, it's a two-party system, but at the same time, if everybody just woke up to the fact that the Democrats are a party of fraud and stopped going to their events, stopped supporting their politicians, stopped giving them any air, I mean, that in itself would be a huge situation to begin with. Is just the deflating of the Democratic Party. And that's, in my opinion, what we need to be doing now, is just ignoring them, stopping listening to them, being like, you guys have no idea what you're doing. Obviously, you lose every race. It seems like it's your strategy now to lose the races and hand them to the Republicans. So that, like, the more extent that becomes clear, all the more reason I feel like people should be embarrassed to be voting for Democrats at this point. It's like, I voted for them for the last time. Like, I now know better that, like, until they address the fraud, every single name on every single ballot that I ever see with the Democratic Party, I'm like, all right, well, I guess that this person's fine running with a party that defrauded millions and millions and millions of people. Why would that be? It's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. And I'm trying to kind of continue this mentality of burning or bust that says, so basically it's the burning or bust mentality continuing on and saying, now that the Democrats have not apologized for their fraud, and in fact, not only aren't apologizing for it, they're saying we had the right to do it, that's everyone's reason to just turn their backs on the Democratic Party and look away. Obviously, there's no other ideal scenario, right? I can't just be like, oh, obviously a third party is going to be your perfect choice, right? You have to use common sense. Obviously, I'm not just going to say, oh, forgive all the sins of the Republicans, they're a perfect party. Obviously, people have to use common sense, but no party except for the Democratic Party has actually defrauded people and said that they had the legal right to do it. So that's my only advice, is if a party has said they have the right to defraud you as a voter, don't vote for that party because they're probably going to defraud you again. That's my one thing. And if the millions of people who have been voting Democrat all come to that realization and say, okay, I'm not going to vote for a party that's already cheated me once, at least once, all of a sudden that's millions and millions and millions of people that are looking for other options. And that's going to completely change the face of all of the other parties. So yes, I know it's hard to fathom what the future of these other parties would look like, but the more people that flood into the Republican Party, the more the party is going to have to adapt to the people who are joining. The more people that flood into third parties, the more those third parties are going to have to adapt and expand. And those are all good things that should be happening right now. And we should be building up our coalitions wherever they are with voters going into 2018. So here's my big thing about voting is people are shaming third-party voters. They're shaming Republicans, and obviously, I'm advising people not to vote for a certain party if they've told you that fraud is okay, right? Obviously, I am advising against voting for the Democrats until the fraud element of their party is absolutely and unequivocally addressed. I think that that's a big enough outlier. But in my voice and in everything that I do, I just say, please vote. Vote, 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 vote. And the most important thing is that everybody encourages everyone to vote. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know what your issues are that matter to you. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that one party is going to do better than the other. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's so assuming to tell someone that you know what their priorities are and you know what their best voting option is. It's just really, it's part of this whole moralizing attitude that it drives me insane. And I will tell people as much as I can about informing them about candidates, advising them who I recommend they vote for. In general, again, only one party has committed massive fraud and argued that they had the right to do so in front of a federal court judge. So we're kind of in a unique historical situation. And so I am not insulting Democrats as people. I am saying it is unadvisable to vote. It's basically just saying don't go back into an abusive relationship, right? I am not advising that anyone votes Democrat ever again. And that obviously means a lot of things. But that assumes that everyone has the common sense to be like, okay, you know what? Maybe there's a point to this in terms of this mental exercise to think, okay, if I can't vote Democrat anymore, that's going to change my options. I'm going to go look and find out who in my community might be a Republican in terms of local leaders. I'm going to go find in my community who might be Green Party, who might be Independent, who might be Socialist Alternative. There are all these other parties. And to immediately write off considering all of them is, to me, it's just, that's really a very closed-minded research strategy to what your options are. And we're in a time of serious revolution. There is a massive anti-establishment sense that is felt by so many of us, and there's really no clear path forward, right? So we need to just go inquisitively and looking, but take a firm stand against fraud. Like, if the Democratic Party in their war wasn't enough to drive people, like, to the point of sickness, like, I can't even deal with the fact that people promote the Democrats because of how much of unbridled war Barack and his administration has gotten us into. Worse than George W. Bush, right? So I don't know how people can vote for a party that's so actively pro-war. But pro-war, if people like war, like getting rich off war, that's their thing. There may be a lot of them. But the fraud element, I just don't understand how anyone in their right mind can basically just be accepting of the reality that, oh, wait a second, so I voted for a party that says that they don't care what my vote is and that they're going to pick the candidate that they want regardless of who my vote is. It's not only just blatant fraud when they're asking for your money and a complete abortion of democracy that is supposed to be the premise of our Constitution, but it's also almost in a way saying they directly are not going to support the candidate that you vote for. Legitimately, they wouldn't have to rig a primary if they didn't know full well that the person they're trying to rig it for wasn't going to earn the votes. So it's basically a direct way of saying, we have the right to pick whoever we want. You better come and not expect for your vote to matter because we know better than you. And it's just, obviously, in this one-party system, it's very much a country club to me. In this one-party system, you can sit there and talk about how your party is the best. You know, we have two parties, there are other parties. It's kind of a weird system. But at the same time, people who are only focused on the two-party duopoly are, you know, maybe seeing it more like they're trapped in one because the other is bad too. But at the same time, we are in a historically unprecedented situation in the world, period. And that calls for bold action. That calls, we as activists need to take bold stances. And taking a bold stance against war is something I encourage everyone to do. And taking a bold stance against fraud and corruption is something that I also encourage people to do. And if I see people being like, oh God, the Democrats are such fraudsters, but the Republicans are terrible worse, so I guess I'll just stick with the Democrats, I'm gonna be like, what? No! Have standards. Draw the line. Literally, it's not too much to ask for your party to not defraud you of your vote. That is literally the term disenfranchise. That is exactly what it means. You have the right to vote. Don't let someone disenfranchise you. If someone disenfranchises you, like the Democratic Party did to me for my activism and vote for Bernie Sanders, if a party disenfranchises you, find whatever recourse you can to speak up for that infringement on your right to vote. It's absolutely insane. And we don't really have a right to vote. The Constitution is kind of weird. It's kind of based on the premise of democracy, but we don't have technically we don't have a constitutional right to vote, so it's kind of a nebulous thing. But in my opinion, everyone who really respects democracy isn't going to tell you who to vote for. Their broader purpose is going to be getting as many people to vote as possible and trusting that if the democracy works as it should, the most people the majority of people, that candidate is going to win. And the premise of that is, right, representation. And it's, you know, if you want to think about it in a way where it's like, okay, the number of people, if we just want to keep the majority of people happy, right, that's just kind of a good sign that as long as the election was conducted fairly, if a majority of people vote, we can always just rely on the fact that, well, the winner of the election at least was what the majority of people who were actively invested in this race wanted to happen. And so that's the majority. And there's a sense of solace of that, right? No matter how terrible the candidate is, at least the democracy, the people who voted, are getting their way and not having a situation where millions and millions and millions of people, and probably the majority, are getting legitimately denied and disenfranchised. So it's really crazy that I get backlash for telling people to say no to fraud. Like, I get so much pushback from people being like, Zach, but no, give the Democrats another chance. Zach, but no, the Republicans are bad. I'm just like, I don't know how people have so much tolerance for fraud. I don't understand it. Like, if I bought clothing from a store that like stole my money and didn't return it, I would not shop at that store again. The Democrats are very similar. It's legitimately just a fraudulent enterprise, and they are arguing for their right to maintain a fraudulent enterprise in court. And my stance is anyone who's supporting them and sticking with them is either okay with it or in on it. And in my opinion, participating in or condoning corruption is corruption. It's black and white to me on that issue. So my recommendation is for the people who have been holding out for Bernie Sanders to still be our hero. You need to wake up and be like, why is he still so invested in the Democratic Party? And especially with the disgusting regard that he had for Tim Canova, who is an outstanding up-and-coming politician, it's at this point just completely obvious that Bernie is a party representative. He is not a people's representative. And that's it. So, and they're losers because they obviously enough people figured that out, that the Democratic Party is fraudulent, and for that and other reasons, the Democratic Party did not do well in the last election because people have common sense. That's about it. And so, to carry on about Democratic Party losers, we can talk about John Ossoff, and we can talk about how it's all the same mentality of the Democrats not changing and the Democrats not changing and in effect sandbagging. They basically shoot themselves in the foot every election, and it almost basically seems like they're allowing the Republicans to win. It's hard to say what the Democrats' real intentions are because they seem like smart people that know what they're doing. And so on the one hand, you should be like, well, what they're doing is deliberate. But when they lose over and over and over and over, it's like, it almost makes you think that they're losing deliberately. And if you don't buy that, then you have to be like, okay, well then they're trying in earnest and just failing every time because they're that clueless. They don't know how to do their one job, which is win elections. So the John Ossoff situation, and I have been so overwhelmed with how much there is to write about recently that I haven't been able to get as many articles out as I want to. But the John Ossoff situation this week was another clear indication that the Democrats have no interest in abandoning the damning problem that makes them lose elections. And I've written about this in a couple of my articles. I'll tie this in because this to me is the main problem the Democrats have that they're never going to ever recover from, and they're going to keep losing until something gives way and changes this scenario. But basically, I call it a trust gap. And ever since Citizens United, we're in a different world after Citizens United, right? That's one of the main things that we have to think about, how this period of time is historically different than everything before Citizens United. Citizens United basically unhinged money, and now it can be in all these different forms, special interest groups, etc. So since Citizens United, you have to think about the way that the Supreme Court was divided on Citizens United, and you have to remember that in theory, so when people think of a duopoly, partly the reason that it's an easy concept is because people are very comfortable in the concepts of yin and yang, black and white dichotomies, right? The mind, to some extent, works in opposites. And so for some people, it fits. Conservative is the opposite of liberal, and in their head they conflate that with Republican is the opposite of Democrat, and it kind of lumps these two opposite mentalities into groups that oppose each other when conservative and liberal aren't quite exactly the same as Democrat and Republican, but to some people it simplifies all down very nicely in their head for them to group one thing or the other. So a lot of people consider, and to some extent that is correct, right? Republicans typically are more conservative, Democrats typically are more liberal. Obviously Democrats are trying to move to the center to wallow in the money that they enjoy, but the thing that you have to think about is all stemming from the Citizens United ruling, in which the conservative Republican justices said money is free to be used just like your words are, and we can't control money. And then you have to look at the liberal justices, the Democratic justices, right, that opposed the ruling. And the opposition to Citizens United ruling, that to me is very obvious that only humans have a right to put their political energy into their political experience. It's, in theory, the Democrats and liberal people's role to denounce the corrupt and corrosive influence of money in politics that's been opened up by the Republican Party, by the conservative justices. So in theory, we as liberals and Democrats, right? I'm not a Democrat, I'm an independent, but in theory, the opposite of the Republican side should be opposing the Citizens United ruling and should be defending the liberal justices' opposition to the ruling. So when you have all of these Democrats just taking money, that shows that they're not truly opposed to what I think is a very, very, very massive issue to many, many, many people in this country is money in politics. I think part of the reason Bernie was so successful in his run against Hillary in the primary was because he was actively not taking donations from special interests, corporations, etc. It was a very clear contrast. Bernie was taking money only from people, only from voters, and that is part of why he did so well, is because people find that to be so important that they're going to put tons of money in to support a person who is challenging the political establishment because of how easy it is to take money. And those types of people are going to be very, very, very rare. But they're going to get the type of massive support that Bernie Sanders gets because of how rare it is to have the character and integrity to say no to corporate finance, because you know that you cannot expect people to believe that you're liberal or that you're a Democrat or that you would be in a good fit for the liberal justices if you don't walk the walk in supporting the opposition to the Citizens United ruling. So in the event that the Democrats take big money and the Republicans take big money, right? The Republicans always take big money, and it makes sense because they wanted that to be the case through the Supreme Court ruling. That's all for them. It's trustworthy. They're not lying to anyone by taking money. The Democrats, if they're on the campaign trail or to whatever extent trying to be, emulating Sonia Sotomayor or Elena Kagan or any of the liberal justices, anyone who's trying to be like, oh, I'm like an up-and-coming badass liberal democratic person, they should in theory be supporting the liberal justices in their opposition to the Citizens United ruling. But if you're taking big sums of money, you're obviously accepting that as the status quo. And the confrontation that made the dynamic between Hillary and Bernie so different was Hillary in every way represented the status quo, and Bernie was challenging the exact status quo, which is money in politics. Money in politics is the status quo now. And if you have two candidates that both represent the status quo, like for example in the Ossoff race in Georgia, if you have two candidates that are both representing the status quo, neither of them are offering a real challenge to the status quo, and by specifically I mean money in politics. Those two people are basically going to be the same in the eyes of the voters, and at that point, spoiler alert, I'm not this like super paid strategist. I'm obviously not paid for my politics in any way whatsoever, but it makes perfect sense. If two candidates are running against each other and they both represent the status quo, the one that's in their district, basically if it's a Republican state, the Republican's going to win. If it's a Democratic state, Democratic area, the Democrat's going to win. If all else is equal and they both represent the status quo, it's probably going to be a continuation of whatever the majority in that area is already. So people are spinning their heads talking about this Ossoff race, being like, oh, he didn't talk about this issue, or he didn't talk about that issue, or he should have talked about this issue. Money, if we learned anything from last year, money doesn't really make someone electable. Money obviously helps someone get elected, but at the end of the day, money can't make someone elected. And that's not just because money can't buy sincerity, money can't buy trust, but it's this complete trust gap between people who are out there as liberals, as Democrats, saying, oh, we should overturn Citizens United. Oh, I believe in election integrity, but at the same time being like, oh, sure. Oh, I can make $30 million off this race even if I lose. Well, then sure, I'll do it. it's not about the issues in this Ossoff race. He was destined to fail this entire time, and I don't even want to get into all of that, but everyone needs to really just focus on the concept of the status quo representing the moneyed influence and the moneyed environments in politics. And any politician that is not challenging the status quo is the status quo, and all of the candidates in any race that all accept money are all going to be amongst each other just status quo representatives, and within that they can vary a little bit by a little bit, but it's not really going to matter how much they are varying nuance wise if they all represent the status quo. Where you see races where there are people who are challenging the status quo and only raising money from individual people and actively rejecting it, those people are going to be the ones that have the sincere ability to have the massive kind of Cinderella story that Bernie did, because of how hard it is to do that and how few people are challenging the status quo. So you're going to hear a lot of people talking about the Jon Ossoff race and thinking that he should have said this or he should have said that or whatever. But the fact of the matter is he was raising big money just like his Republican opponent was. And so into the eyes of the voters who understand that the status quo is money in politics and that's bad, you're going to not get those people to the polls if both the candidates are status quo. You're gonna not change the dynamic of an area by running representatives of the status quo. It's so straightforward to me, and I think it's straightforward to a lot of people, but it's just the media. And the Democratic Party is basically the media. And, oh my God, I need to get into this in an article. I need a 40-page article about this. I could write books about this. But it's all about the status quo. At every election you see going forward, it's not, and we know this, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are both corporate-controlled parties at this point. There's very few people, even like Bernie last year, who are swearing off corporate donations. And that's partly because what they turned our government into was basically just this big money laundering operation. And now it's just people who have money shifting it around each other and deciding who the representatives of those areas are, not based on the issues that those people are espousing, but just basically the puppet masters deciding who gets to be the benefactor of the financial elite that's invested in any election at any given time. I spoke for too long. I need to drink a little bit. So don't act surprised when people who represent the status quo, whatever their party affiliation is, if they're representing the status quo by accepting big money, don't expect them to magically just do better than a Republican because Trump's so bad. The Democratic Party brand is about as bad as it gets. Somebody posted this. They had a horrible fundraising month last April, one of their worst in many years, and another horrible fundraising month, this past May. And that's going to continue because the Democrats are basically a rotting carcass of a party. There's no reason anyone should keep hanging on like they might change. The party has all these different options that they can take internally as a party to change if they wanted to. They're obviously not. That's a sign that they don't want to, and they won't. And the three things that you should keep in mind that the party could do, and I've been saying this more and more and more on tweets and in posts and stuff because I think it's really important for people to know that there are very easy things that the Democratic Party can do to change the party that just take decisions internally from within the party. The first one being abolishing superdelegates, the second one being opening primaries, and the third one being installing ranked choice voting. All of those three things would completely open up the Democratic Party in massive, massive, massive ways and allow them the opportunity to build a new relationship with all of those different people that have been disenfranchised by superdelegates, that have been disenfranchised by being independent and not being eligible to vote in Democratic Party primaries, and by people who understand that the whole all or nothing concept of an election is not a truly democratic way of conducting an election, which is why we want ranked choice voting, because it is more of an effective way to understand the interests of the electorate. So every time someone tells you the Democratic Party, I mean, nobody's going to be saying the Democratic Party is changing anything. They're obviously sticking with all of their ways, so it's obvious. But if anyone tells you that they're trying to change, you can tell them, well, they can abolish superdelegates, they can open primaries, and they can institute ranked choice voting. Those are three all very obvious things they can do internally within the party that would be completely democratic and would open up the opportunity for more people to vote. And until they do that, they are actively not doing that. And that's why I repeatedly say the Democratic Party is exclusionary. They don't want people to vote. And that's why they have these strict rules about who can vote in their primaries, and why they're arguing in court that they can pick the primary, they can pick the nominee anyway. It's completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. And they use the term Democratic Party to try and, like, legitimately to try and dupe you into thinking that it's actually democratic. But if it were a truly Democratic Party, none of the politicians in the party would be talking about me, 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 me. They would be talking about voters, 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 voters. They would be saying, what can I do to get this community to vote? What can I do to get more people to vote? I want people to vote. I don't care if they vote for me or not. I just want people to vote. That is the mentality of a person who really, truly supports democracy, is that they want people to vote. They don't want people to vote for them. It's this whole mixed cult of personality that comes into it, where Democrats think, oh, I need to have a big name, I need to be name recognition, doesn't matter. That's what wins elections. No. Getting people to the polls wins elections. Telling people to vote and having them trust you, that wins elections. The Democratic Party obviously doesn't want to be doing any of that, and so they're just accepting their status as losing over and over and over. And so to segue into my third favorite person whose name I mentioned in this, Nomiki Konst. So, we really have to take on the Democratic media. Let me talk about the Democratic media real quick before I get on to Nomiki's sins. So the Democratic Party spun into this whole situation about the media and the Democratic Party's comfort level in the post-Citizens United environment. So something that you have to remember is that, again, we've got the Republican Party. They have trustworthiness in the idea that they can take big money, right? The Republican Party is fine with money in politics. No one's going to challenge them on that. They're going to go around acting like they love money in politics because they do, and that's their party's stance. Now, the Democratic Party is supposed to, if it follows that the liberal justices on the court opposed it for a reason, which they did, and a good reason, that the Democratic Party should be opposed to money in politics. Now, the big element of the Democratic Party that is completely in opposition to the Citizens United ruling getting overturned is, what is it? Anyone know? Anyone know the one big part of the Democratic Party that makes them so adhered to Citizens United that they couldn't think about it? Anyone? Any guesses? It's Hollywood, right? The entertainment industry. The vast majority of the liberal elite, right? Like how many Ellen DeGeneres and Katy Perry and Madonna and all of these people shilling for the Democratic Party, the entertainment industry, by and large, is behind the Democratic Party. And those are all of the people that make money off commercials, want to be in movies, want to be in commercials. The whole entertainment media is against the Republicans and they're for the Democrats. But they also make their living in the big money environment that wouldn't be possible. Silicon Valley is a big problem also, but I'm talking specifically in terms of what's appearing on TV and what's appearing in with Democrats and the industries that support the Democratic Party but are basically big Hollywood entertainment industries that rely on movie trailers, advertisements, things like that. Obviously, TV stations love campaigns and they love politicians because there's all this money coming in for commercials on every level, local, national, you name it. Big money is coming in to television stations, to radio stations. All of these campaigns are able to shell so much money out and put so much money into the media. The media isn't going to say, we don't want your money, we want what's best for people. Sadly, the media no longer represents people, but you really have to remember that the entire Hollywood liberal elite, they theoretically are Democrats, but they also are totally fine with money in politics. They won't say that because they want to seem like they love democracy and they're so tolerant and inclusive, but they're not, because the Democratic Party obviously isn't inclusive. So that's a really big factor that people have to remember, is that the entire Hollywood and entertainment industry is completely invested in Citizens United not getting overturned, because as soon as Citizens United gets overturned, that's going to mean a very, very, very different picture, and in many ways a lot of the economic loss and dislocation from their previous sources of income for the entertainment industries on TV, on the radio, that get paid big, big, big money by these campaigns that are allowed to have super PACs shelling money out on their behalf, right? So don't ever forget that the whole Hollywood liberal entertainment establishment is part and parcel with the Democratic Party that should be opposing Citizens United, but in fact is not really opposing it because they're perfectly comfortable in the environment of money in politics. And so you have people on the Young Turks, for example, that are out there trying to support Democrats just like it's their duty. Like they can't, it's so rigid in this duopoly too. It's like, it's so crazy because obviously, like in general, the Republicans are stripping benefits. You know, we've got serious problems with the Republicans, but at the same time, the issue of fraud, the issue of rigging a primary didn't come up recently with Republicans, and my vote, I've never voted Republican, my vote wasn't disenfranchised by the Republican Party. My vote was disenfranchised by the Democratic Party. So that's an issue that needs to be litigated by the Democratic Party, and it kind of, but doesn't really matter what's going on the other side. And the Young Turks, for example, firstly, somebody made a really good point on Twitter, and I tried to repurpose this and reiterate this, but media entities should not be pushing political candidates. And anyone who didn't realize that the Justice Democrats and Cenk and Wolfpack all being kind of in the same little incestuous circle with the Young Turks and them trotting out Ro Khanna, if it didn't occur to people that the media should not be pushing candidates on someone, think about that for a bit, because it's obviously hugely ethically irresponsible, and it should be a huge red flag that any entertainment industry is going to try and prop people out there and give them airtime without disclosing why. So no news channel should be pushing a candidate on you to begin with. So that the Young Turks was doing that they're so comfortably, the people that operate that group are so comfortably involved with Brand New Congress, Justice Democrats, Wolfpack, all of these kind of groups in and around the Young Turks, they are all in it, invested in the Democratic Party. And so the Young Turks, like the Democrats, are invested in the Democratic Party's continuation. And because of that, they're going to be getting ad buys coming in from liberal-leaning entertainment industries, right? And so obviously the Young Turks and any media entity that's getting paid money by advertisers is going to want that money coming in from advertisers still. So they're not going to support anyone who's opposed to Citizens United, and they're going to try and prop up the most democratic people who are democratic, but at the same time not so liberal and progressive that they actually want to get rid of the money in politics. Because if no television network at this point would let someone get on air and go encourage people to vote against the interests of the entertainment industry. That's unfortunately how far we've come, and everyone on the Young Turks is basically invested in the future of the Democratic Party, and so to some extent they're going to be cheerleading for this party, and obviously they haven't been completely sober about what's been going on, so there's dishonesty in the mix. And it's like, okay, if I can't trust you on one thing, then I can't trust you on anything. And Nomiki got on this, she was like sitting on the lawn with her microphone, rambling about the Ossoff race. Again, one of these experts, strategists that has complete conflicts of interest. And she mentioned the DNC Unity Committee, which is good because I called her out for it in my People's Summit piece. And she's like, oh, I agreed not to talk about that. It was so weird and just not right. But she's just sitting here spinning her thoughts completely incoherently about this issue or that issue or this issue or that issue on the John Ossoff race. And it's like, she's one of these people, just like all of these other experts that just seem so flabbergasted as to why their strategies keep losing. And she's trying to be the one who's like, I'm the one who really gets it. I'm on the Unity Committee telling them that these strategies are losing strategies, but she's not actually, obviously, separating the most important element, which is the Citizens United court ruling. And so it's like, Nomiki, we see that you're smart and you're sitting and trying to make your argument in a smart way without actually saying what people need to hear and want to hear, because it's your job and your professional interest that the Democratic Party continue to be receiving massive amounts of money from super PACs and other special interest groups that are allowed to give that type of money specifically because of the Citizens United ruling. That's just like the inherent realization that everyone has to have when you're watching any of these democratic news medias, any news media. Obviously, you have to keep in mind who the financial interests are that are behind it, because that's going to tell you what they want, what their message is going to be or not going to be. But then you also really just need to understand that the media and the entertainment industry is so invested in the continuation of Citizens United. You're not going to see any of these big media networks ever challenging Citizens United, because at that point, the entertainment industry will no longer be anything what it used to be as soon as Citizens United overturned. So that's the reality, and that's what none of these people on TV are talking about and just assuming isn't an issue, because it would directly negatively affect their business, their company, their everything. And it's so bizarre, and this is because we've nationalized our media so much that there's not really strict competition for local media entities to be giving good, truthful content, so they have to compete against each other in giving better, truthful content. That's all not happening because the media has been so consolidated that it's now under this big umbrella where it all has to be kind of nationalized issues, and it's just like the continued problem with focusing on the federal government as the source of our problems and the way do we solve them, when really we need to be focusing on exactly the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Bill Clinton wanted this to happen because this is exactly what it does, is it stomps out the interest of local news organizations to be the bearers of truth, because the truth is no longer what is selling, because you have to hide from some extent. You have to hide to some extent from the truth, because if you admit the truth that people want money out of politics, you're basically saying, look, we as a business, we make all of our money on ads and we want as much money as possible and we're trying to make more money in the future. So we're not going to be able to say we don't want this money in the future because it's unethical. These are going to be the snakes that know better and get out there and lie to you. And that's why it's such bullshit, is they're trying to be cool and trying to look smart and trying to act like they know what they're talking about, when in reality they behind the scenes to some extent know that what they're saying is contrary to the interest of all Americans of all party affiliations that want money out of politics. They're assuming you don't get it or you don't know that, and they're talking to you like the status quo can never change. And the status quo can change, and it does change, and a lot of people are afraid of it changing, and that's fair to some extent. But to the extent that the status quo has trapped so many people, and that this status quo has been created by the rich in this country to marginalize and impoverish and continue to impoverish the poor, obviously the status quo needs to change. And so, in my opinion, we shouldn't be supporting any news media that is allowing and supporting the continuation of the status quo. And that's why indie media is taking off so much right now, is because indie media is the only element that is opposing big money truthfully, because while yes, some independent media folks have made enough money on their own doing their own thing that they're being paid as an individual for their audience, and that's a different thing than being paid by a political party or affiliated groups that have the interests of that political party. So what I wrote in an article a little bit ago called Jordan Chariton and the Collapse of Mainstream Media is, now that the DNC has admitted in court that they are completely fine with fraud and that they have the right to rig the primary, and we saw that the Democratic media allowed them. So the Democratic media sat there while Hillary Clinton and the DNC said, hey, look, we're going to be the presidential nominee, so you need to report on me. and obscure my scandals and don't talk about Bernie much and raise Trump. The media all listen to that. The national media all listen. The media is completely entangled in the fraud that the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton campaign conducted. And so all of them, as they linger, they're going to still downplay this because it's completely incriminating to them, and any mention of this can be used against them in the court of law. It literally can. So all of them are going to avoid talking about this like the plague, but just go back to the WikiLeaks website and read all of these John Podesta emails and read about all the articles that were sent to Hillary Clinton's campaign before they published. Read about all of the editors and reporters and anchors that were actively helping Hillary Clinton rig the primary before anyone had voted. So many people in the media are implicated in the fraud that was conducted by the DNC lawsuit. They are not going to talk about it. They're going to pretend they did nothing wrong, and they're going to continue to act as if the status quo cannot change because they are the ones that are continuing to make a living and make money off the status quo, and they will fight for that status quo tooth and nail, and we have to fight them tooth and nail just as hard, and we are, and we're winning. We need to keep it up, and that's why we need to keep fighting for indie media, keep fighting against every single one of these Nomiki Konst and Jordan Cheritons that gets up there and tries to sound progressive while they are not acknowledging the fact that the existence of these major media entities is to continue the status quo that allows big money and special interests to put as much money as they want into politicians, because so much of that directly goes into television ads that fund these programs. That's about it. But we really, really, really need to stick to this concept of the status quo being money in politics, and knowing that that is the status quo that candidates need to be opposing, and candidates need to be ready to oppose that if they expect to win. Obviously, this will have a positive effect on any candidate that runs in opposition to money in politics, whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent, right? And to some extent, if someone runs as a Democrat but is challenging the status quo and not accepting money and not being involved in the Democratic Party, I don't really know why they would run as a Democrat, because that's the benefit, is having the party's affiliation and support. But if they really are walking the walk and not taking corporate money, that's a person I would say to consider vote for, regardless of what party they are, right? And I'm not going to pretend like I know what races are important to you or where you live or what the status of, the different issues that matter to you are. I'm not going to tell anyone in the country. It's like, how many different states do we have? How many different cities are in the country? To assume that I know your issues better than you is something I would never do. It's ridiculous. But we all should be considering our options, and in my opinion, supporting candidates that are opposed to the status quo. That's technically the idea behind the progressive name. It means changing the status quo. And most people want to call themselves progressive because it's like the cool word, because everyone wants to change the status quo because the status quo is so terrible. So yes, it's cool to sound like you want to change the status quo. But when people that represent the status quo are trying to co-opt the language of the people challenging the status quo to use it on their own, it's the most ridiculously blatant hypocrisy that I ever can possibly imagine. And I don't know how they can live with themselves and sleep at night, especially given the fact that the Democrats are the party of war. It's insane. It's not even like this party is like doing good things. This party is losing elections, sandbagging, allowing people like Donald Trump to win elections, and when they were in office, they were attacking any country they wanted to without authorization from Congress, dropping drone bombs wherever they want, expanding surveillance beyond what's completely constitutional. The Democratic Party is just Cornel West. Brother West wrote the most amazing article called "Pity the Sad Legacy of Barack Obama." I reread that recently because I quoted it in one of my recent articles, in my article about the DNC fraud lawsuit motion for protection. Is Barack Obama did everything he could to continue his odious legacy. And I love linking in my articles, linking to other pieces that support the points that I'm trying to make. And everyone should reread Cornel West's piece about Barack Obama's odious legacy. I put that term odious in there. Cornel West called it "Pity the Sad Legacy of Barack Obama." But it really nails all the different things the Democratic Party descended into in the face of the optimism and hope that Barack sold his candidacy on. And I think it's really important that people remember that, and people really, really think about that, and don't let the Democrats get away with that. And don't think that just because now Trump and these asshole Republicans are doing terrible things in DC, just because the Republicans are bad doesn't mean the Democrats don't need to be held accountable for what they've done to our country, to our democratic process, and to the countries all over the world where our military is terrorizing innocent people on a daily basis and has for years and years and years and years and years. It's, to me, completely indefensible. And at this point, I, in my personal life, am getting to the point where people are like, oh, Democrat, when they say Democratic casually, I'm just like, have you not researched how much this party has invested in war and has invested in spying on you and has invested in killing innocent? It's like, I hate this phrase, I overuse it, I can't even, but I legitimately can't even when people are like, oh yeah, I'm voting Democrat. It's like, how? How are you okay with that? Are you legitimately just reading the hope and change words and not like actually doing any research and just trying to vote for something based on the flyer alone? It's so ridiculous to me. And I don't know how people, I hate war, like violence, and violence is like the most like allergic thing to me ever. I can't even, like, it makes me sick. It makes me sick to even think about. I can't even like be involved in thinking about violence in my head, much less support war or participate in war or strategize way to make money off war. I mean, war profiteers, in my opinion, are like the most evil people on earth. People who fight wars, I mean, if we had any just wars, that'd be one thing. We don't. Wars are just for greed, basically. But people who fight in wars are one thing. But people who try to make money off war, I really just absolutely cannot believe that more people aren't in opposition to that. Because obviously, and Cornel West talks about this in his piece, it's basically the commoditization or the commercialization or the gangsterization of all of the industries that are meant to be government industries and protect us. They've been turned into industries that we're trying to turn a profit on, and so we're just trying to juice the industry for as much as we can, and we're not trying to build the industry in a way that helps and protects, supports the American people or the people of the world. So I encourage everyone to really understand to what extent the Democratic Party is involved in military interventionism around the country. Most of us do on the Real Progressives. This is why we're here. But help your family and friends understand really what it means to say you're a Democrat at this point. That means you supported Barack Obama for his party of war, 8 years. The fraud and the corruption, to me, are beyond the pale. And I know that it's kind of a shocking idea to tell people that the Democrats, like, you had to quit them cold turkey. But in my opinion, we are in a time of such serious crises. The average person cannot continue to just yawn and witness it and let it change later. We need to take action. I'm taking action. Everyone should be taking action to speak out against the corrupt status quo. And the corrupt status quo is the way it is because the Democrats have allowed it to become this way. And it's so ridiculous, too, because Barack and Hillary are smart enough people that if they wanted to make a shit ton of money and get as rich as they want off industries that actually benefited the people, they still could have. They still could have been filthy fucking rich and actually let people not eat cat food for dinner. They don't even give a shit about the working class. They just want to be as rich as possible. And so they're doing everything they can to get as rich as possible, including extract fossil fuels from the earth to the extent that they possibly can and win the gas war. Because, oh, well, somebody's got to take all the fossil fuels out of the earth. It might as well be Americans. And you know what? Well, somebody's got to invade as many countries for all of that fossil fuel. So it might as well be us. It's like, the American economy could be so rich off of renewable energy by now. It's insane, but it is not. And that is for a reason. It's a parasitic industry that loots people, that extrapolates wealth in every possible way. And like I said in Cornel West's piece, it just basically gangsterizes and commoditizes industries that are supposed to be benefiting the people in ways that benefit the profit of the company and benefit the shareholders in direct opposition to the interests of the American people. Drink. Anyone have the time? Can someone tell me what time it is? I might be over. I don't have my computer, so somebody tell me what time it is, because I don't know how much time I had left. So that was my main 3 shticks, and I'll post a link to the Cornell West article in here. Can somebody tell me what time it is? Please, somebody tell me what time it is. I don't know what time it is. I don't have my watch. 8:15. Oh shit, I'm totally over. Fuck. Okay, so I'm way over. Thank you guys for the time. So I wasn't watching the clock, obviously, but it's 8:15, so I have gone over and I gave my shtick, and that was it. Thanks everyone for joining me. Again, my name is Zach Haller. I have a YouTube channel that you should subscribe to. I've got a Patreon page that you should contribute $1 or $2 per month to if you want. I think that that's really going to be the future of indie media, is just us, instead of subscribing to shows and putting our money into entertainment, is putting $1 to me, putting $1 to Debbie, putting $1 to Tim, putting $1 to Steve, putting $1, put $1, $2 in all of the independent media sources that you trust a month, and build up those subscriptions. And that's going to be the new people's-based model that supports indie media and that encourages people for telling the truth and rewards them for telling the truth, and it will give the people all of the volition to take that money away if the independent media that they're supporting rescinds their allegiance to the people, and then the people can take that right back. So I encourage you to check out my YouTube and my Patreon page. I write on Medium. I have a Twitter that you may have read once or twice. I didn't have a chance to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement in this episode, because I wanted to focus on the Democratic Party, because that's kind of my expertise. But Caitlin Johnstone and I just did a podcast, our Talking Smack podcast, that I'll also put in the link here, and she and I touched on Philando Castile and Charlene Lyles. And please invest time in researching and motivating and mobilizing and speaking out against the horrific events that continue to unfold against our Black brothers and sisters. I didn't have time to touch on that tonight, but again, read Cornell West's piece. I'll post that. Check out me and Katie's podcast. I almost called it duet. Check out me and Katie's thing, because I cover a lot on that I wasn't able to cover here. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and thanks for everyone who always has stuck up for me. I tweeted about that, but there's a lot of attacks on indie media right now, and I'm just doing my best to be truthful, and a lot of people in the entertainment and media elite don't like that. So I really appreciate all the folks who have stood up for me and stood up for my voice. And I'm always open to feedback for how I can do a better job and what more I can do to help with what we need to be doing right now. So, good night from Seattle. Everybody have a great weekend. My name is Zach Haller. It's going to be Pride here in Seattle, so you might see some rainbow surprises coming from me this weekend if I get a trick up my sleeve, pun intended. Have a good weekend, everybody. My name is Zach Haller, signing off. Take care.